For many people across the world, Marilyn Monroe, the famous Hollywood star, will always be the sex symbol, the girl on the sidewalk grating with the wind blowing up her skirt right up to her waist. For many others, Marilyn Monroe was the woman who almost moaned while singing Happy Birthday to President John F. Kennedy. But the truth is, she was neither. In fact, it could be said that Marilyn Monroe wasn't the person she was perceived to be. She was simply a fascinating character created by Norma Jean Baker, the little girl who dreamt of becoming a movie star one day and did become one. As a child, Norma Jean Baker was in and out of foster homes, state care, and the guardianship of various family friends. She never got to know who was her father. Her mother Gladys had been confined to a psychiatric facility, compelling Monroe to move in and out of state homes. As per an article in the Vanity Fair, during this time, Marilyn Monroe also alleged that she was sexually abused by many adults multiple times. Gladys was always mentally quite unstable and perhaps didn't know who fathered her baby. Hence, in order to not raise a child without a father's name attached, Gladys put down the name of Martin Mortensen, her ex-husband, on the birth certificate. Gladys once showed Norma Jean a photo of a mustachioed man, identifying him as Charles Stanley Gifford, and said that he was her real father. A fact that Gifford's family vehemently denies to this day. Young Norma Jean thought he resembled Clark Gable and began to fantasize that Clark Gable was her dad. In a truly ironical situation, breaking Marilyn's heart, for the film The Misfits, she was paired opposite, guess who? Clark Gable. This was a particularly turbulent period in Monroe's life. The movie production was taking a toll. She was almost always late on the sets, making the cast and crew stretch out and adjust to too many things. The film did get done, but then 10 days after the shoot was wrapped up, Clark Gable had a massive cardiac arrest and he died. His widow said that the eternal waiting during the film was what killed him. She didn't name Marilyn, but can't we understand whom was she pointing a finger at? So the one man Marilyn thought was almost her father got killed, in a way due to her negligent attitude. This was not the only time someone had commented on her behavior on the sets. After working with Monroe on Bus Stop, actor Don Murray noted that while her talent was undeniable, she was never fully comfortable in front of the camera. I quote, "She was a very experienced film actress, but she could forget so many of the mechanical techniques. She would constantly miss her marks, so she would be out of focus or out of the light or in a shadow. I think it was a lack of confidence. For somebody whom the camera loved, she was still terrified of going before the camera." Unquote. Very few people may know that Monroe had a stuttering problem since childhood. To overcome that, she used a strange tactic of speaking with heavy breathing sound, which not only covered the stammer, but which also made her voice sound sexy. While Monroe was acting in her final movie, Something's Got to Give, her stutter came back, making it very difficult for the actress to deliver her lines. She was fired from the film and then hired again. Everyone knows and remembers the classic photo of Marilyn Monroe, beautiful and beaming, standing on a subway grate as a rush of air blows the billowy white skirt up around her legs. She looks picture perfect. She looks happy. That happy pose, however, came at an unbearable cost. Playing the girl in Billy Wilder's The 7-Year Itch, Marilyn was shooting the scene in New York City at Lexington Avenue and 52nd Street. Nearly 5,000 onlookers watched, hooted, and applauded as the crew filmed. One of those onlookers was Marilyn's husband, the baseball great Joe DiMaggio. He was not pleased. A violent, highly charged argument followed this incident, which upset Marilyn to end the marriage and file for divorce on the grounds of mental cruelty. Soon after her divorce, Marilyn was introduced to the famous and controversial author Arthur Miller by Elia Kazan. Marilyn was reportedly seeing Kazan at this time. The acclaimed playwright Arthur Miller was swayed by the blonde beauty, and the Hollywood actress could not resist getting attracted to him, who had just recently separated from his wife. Marilyn was strictly advised by her production house not to get involved with the alleged communist author, but she refused to listen. It was her steadfast commitment and her statements in court which helped Arthur Miller escape from going to prison when he was associated with unlawful activities. It did bring Marilyn under the scanner, though, as an FBI investigation began against her. It was also suspected that the only house that she owned was bugged by the government. On June 29, 1956, Marilyn and Arthur held a press conference at Miller's house in Connecticut to announce their marriage. The local media, however, was quite cold to this announcement and simply reported, "Local resident will marry Miss Monroe of Hollywood." However, the euphoria of marriage did not last, as Marilyn found notes that Miller had written expressing his concern regarding Monroe and their marriage. He explained how he was disappointed in her, doubting his decision to ever marry a star, and how he was sometimes embarrassed by her in front of his friends. Their marriage thus took a turn for the worse. After this, Monroe suffered multiple miscarriages, for which she blamed her many addictions. Marilyn Monroe's relationship with Miller eventually broke down after he wrote the part of Rosalind for her in the film The Misfits, co-starring Clark Gable. The film was too raw, the portrayal too personal, and by the time it ended, Marilyn was once again facing life all alone. One of the most heartbreaking things said about Marilyn came from the director of The 7-Year Itch, Billy Wilder. I quote, "Her marriages didn't work out because Joe DiMaggio found out she was Marilyn Monroe, and Arthur Miller found out she wasn't Marilyn Monroe." Unquote. Despite all the photos of her winning smile, Marilyn was a profoundly sad person. Just think of it. The most desired woman in the world couldn't find happiness with a single man. She was desperate to have a family, but was unable to maintain a pregnancy. Strangely, Monroe considered Marilyn Monroe to be another person. Truman Capote, a good friend, once recounted a lunch where Marilyn disappeared to the washroom and was gone so long he went looking for her. He found her staring in the mirror. When he asked what she was doing, she responded, "Looking at her." Susan Strasberg recalled an incident when she and Marilyn were walking through New York City. They had been relatively unbothered most of the day. No one seemed to notice the blonde bombshell in public, which Susan found odd. Suddenly, Marilyn turned to Susan and said, I quote, "Do you want to see me be her?" Unquote. Susan said, I quote, "She seemed to make some inner adjustment. Something turned on inside her. And suddenly there she was. Not the simple girl I had been strolling with, but Marilyn Monroe, the Hollywood star. Now heads turned and people crowded around us." Unquote. Marilyn Monroe had a thing for intellectual men. Monroe's marriage to writer Arthur Miller is proof of the same. But there's more evidence. Monroe was once roommates with actress Shelley Winters, who said they'd made a list of men they wanted to sleep with, just for fun. I quote, "There was no one under 50 on hers," unquote, Winters later reported. She went on to say, I quote, "I never got to ask her before she died how much of her list she had achieved. But on her list was Albert Einstein. And after her death, I noticed that there was a silver framed photograph of him on her white piano." Unquote. On May 19, 1962, Marilyn Monroe's last public appearance was on the stage at Madison Square Garden. She was wearing a transparent dress of pink silk gauze, strewn with 2,500 rhinestones. Staggering, the icon approached the microphone and sang a lascivious "Happy Birthday, Mr. President" for John Fitzgerald Kennedy, who was in the front row of this surreal scene. Their affair would be officially confirmed only in the 1970s. Her second husband DiMaggio continued to be there when Monroe needed him, including bringing her to spring training with him so that she could get away from Hollywood for a while. Shortly before her death, DiMaggio had been telling friends that they were going to get remarried. When Marilyn died, DiMaggio oversaw the funeral, and he refused to allow almost anyone from Hollywood to attend. "Tell them, if it wasn't for them, she would still be here," he said. DiMaggio had roses delivered to her grave twice a week for 20 years following her death. The biggest misconception that people, especially men, had about Marilyn Monroe was that she was just a pretty face. What many people are not aware of is that she loved to read. Monroe's bookshelf was exceedingly impressive. At the time of her death, she owned more than 400 volumes, including several first editions. After years, when she finally wanted to show the world that she harbors more talent than just being the blonde bombshell on the screen, the actress Marilyn was never given the chance. Had she not died in 1962 at just 36, what might she have done then? Would she have continued to act? or become Mrs. Joe DiMaggio for the second time, as the latter claimed, or carved out an Oscar-winning career for herself. What could have been remains a mystery, much like Marilyn Monroe herself.